She revealed she was a virgin at the very moment she decided to give herself. He, a millionaire used to controlling everything, lost control. The confession awakened something dark, intense, almost dangerous. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you are watching from. Cassian Blackwood was more than a millionaire. He was an enigma wrapped in bespoke suits, a man whose soul had been forged between irreparable losses and transactions that left stains no amount of money could wash clean. He had built his empire on ruins, some made of concrete and steel, others of flesh, blood, and the kind of silence that screamed louder than any confession. The sort of man who didn't believe in love, not out of cynicism but out of self-preservation. To love was to expose oneself, and he had learned far too young that every surrender came with a price written in blood. The past had carved invisible scars into him. His father's death, under circumstances that remained conveniently unexplained, ruled an accident by investigators who had looked the other way for the right amount of money. His mother committed to a psychiatric facility in the Yorkshire countryside, where she spent her final days staring at walls and speaking to ghosts only she could see. An empire inherited before he even knew how to manage his own emotions, thrust upon him at 23, when he should have been finishing university and making the mistakes young men are supposed to make. Instead, he learned to sign contracts worth millions, to read the lies in men's eyes, to build walls so high around himself that even he forgot what lay buried at the center. He had never had time for innocence, only for control. His offices occupied the top 3 floors of a glass tower in Canary Wharf, overlooking the Thames like a sentinel watching over lesser mortals. From his desk, London sprawled beneath him, a city of 8 million souls, and he knew how to manipulate at least 1,000 of them. Property development was his public face, the legitimate business that filled the pages of the Financial Times. But beneath that veneer ran darker currents, acquisitions that displaced communities, demolitions that erased histories, deals struck in private clubs where memberships cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Cassian told himself he was simply better at the game than others. That survival required ruthlessness. That sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. He was 38 now, his hair still dark, save for the silver threading through at his temples, his body maintained with the discipline of a man who understood that physical strength was just another form of armor. Women pursued him with the determination of hunters tracking prey, drawn by his wealth, his power, the dangerous edge that promised excitement. He took what he wanted and gave nothing back, not really. Sex was transaction, companionship was temporary, and love was a fairy tale for people who didn't understand how the world actually worked. Until her. Elena Carter existed in a different world entirely, though it was only a few miles away from his tower. She taught Latin at St. Benedict's, a Catholic secondary school in Suffolk that was fighting a losing battle against closure. The building was Victorian, beautiful in its decay with high ceilings and windows that let in light that seemed to come from a gentler time. The students were mostly from council estates, children of immigrants and single mothers, kids whose society had already decided weren't worth the investment. Elena loved them fiercely. She was 28, though she carried herself with the gravity of someone who had seen more than her years should have allowed. An orphan since she was 7, she had grown up at the Holy Cross Convent in Kent, raised by nuns who were kind but could never replace what she had lost. Her childhood had been one of silence and books, of prayers whispered in cold chapels, and the absence of human touch that left a particular kind of hunger in the soul. She had studied classics at Cambridge on a full scholarship, a girl from nowhere who proved she belonged everywhere, though she never quite felt she did. After graduating, she could have pursued academia, research, a comfortable position at some prestigious institution. Instead, she returned to teach at a place like the one she had wished existed when she was young, a place where someone saw potential in children the world had already written off. Her colleagues thought her odd, beautiful in an understated way. With dark hair she wore pulled back, hazel eyes that seemed to hold secrets, a reserve that some mistook for coldness but was really just careful self-protection. She never went to the pub after work, never joined the gossip in the staff room, never dated despite the occasional interested glance from male teachers or the fathers who came to parent evenings. She had never been with a man, not because she was afraid, but because she had decided long ago that her body and her heart were territories she would only surrender to someone who understood their value. Her virginity was more than physical. It was an emotional state, a piece of herself she had preserved with the same fierce determination she brought to everything else. She didn't expect love, but she refused to accept its absence as inevitable. She didn't believe in fairy tales, but she believed in choice. The night they met should have been unremarkable. A charity gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum. One of those glittering affairs where London's wealthy gathered to write cheques and feel virtuous. Eleanor had no business being there. She had been invited by mistake, or so she thought at the time. Sister Mary Catherine, the elderly nun who had raised her and still sent letters filled with advice Elena rarely took, had been on the original guest list as a representative of the convent. But Sister Mary had fallen ill, and someone somehow had arranged for the invitation to be transferred to Elena's name instead. She almost hadn't gone. She had nothing appropriate to wear for such an event, and the thought of being surrounded by people who existed in a world so far removed from her own made her want to stay home with Virgil and a glass of cheap wine. But some impulse she couldn't name made her accept. She borrowed a dress from one of the younger teachers, a simple black sheath that made her look elegant in a way that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with the way she carried herself. She took the tube to South Kensington, emerging into an evening that smelled of rain and possibility. The museum was transformed. The entrance hall glowed with soft golden light. Classical music drifted through galleries filled with art and antiquities, and everywhere she looked were people who belonged to a species she had only observed from a distance. Women in gowns that cost more than she earned in 6 months, jewels at their throats that could have funded her school for a year, men in dinner jackets discussing deals over champagne that probably cost more per bottle than her monthly rent. She felt the familiar sensation of being invisible, of being the one person in a room full of people who didn't quite exist in the same dimension. She was considering leaving, already calculating whether she could slip out without anyone noticing, when she felt it, the weight of someone's attention. She turned, and across the crowded gallery, through the drift of conversations and clinking glasses, she saw him. Cassian Blackwood stood near a display of medieval manuscripts, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Surrounded by a small cluster of admirers he seemed entirely uninterested in. He was tall, powerfully built in a way his tailored dinner jacket couldn't quite contain, with features that were striking rather than handsome, dark eyes that held something dangerous. But it was the intensity of his gaze that stopped her breath. He was looking at her as though she was the only person in the room, as though everyone else had simply faded into background noise. She should have looked away. Every instinct told her to break that connection, to return to her safe invisibility. But she didn't. She held his gaze, and something passed between them that had no name, something primal and inevitable, like recognizing a stranger you've been waiting your entire life to meet. He moved toward her with the kind of confidence that suggested he had never been denied anything he wanted. People stepped aside without thinking, making way for him the way subjects make way for a king. He didn't smile as he approached, but there was something in his expression that made her pulse quicken, a hunger barely contained beneath perfect control. "You don't belong here," he said when he reached her. Not an accusation, but an observation. His voice was deep, cultured, with the faintest hint of something rougher beneath the polish. "Neither do you," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. That made him pause. Really look at her, not just at her face but into her eyes, searching for something. "What makes you say that? You're looking at everyone here with contempt, as though you despise them even as you move among them. That's not belonging. That's performing." The corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but close. "And what are you doing here?" "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "I think someone made a mistake. Mistakes don't happen at events like this. Everything is deliberate." He extended his hand. Cassian Blackwood. She knew the name, of course. Everyone did. The property developer who was buying up half of London, the businessmen whose companies had been featured in investigative pieces about gentrification and displacement, the man whose father had died mysteriously and whose mother had lost her mind. The tabloids loved him, speculated about him, tried to pierce the mystery he cultivated like armor. "Elena Carter," she said, placing her hand in his. The contact was electric, and from the way his eyes darkened, she knew he felt it too. "And what do you do, Elena Carter, when you're not attending charity galas by mistake?" "I teach Latin to children who will probably never use it." "Then why teach it?" "Because it teaches them how to think, how to see patterns, how to understand that everything they're experiencing now, someone else has experienced before. That they're part of a continuity, that they matter." He studied her for a long moment, still holding her hand, his thumb brushing against her knuckles in a gesture that might have been unconscious but felt deeply deliberate. "You're an idealist. You say that like it's a disease. In my experience, idealism doesn't survive contact with reality. Then you haven't met very resilient idealists." He did smile then, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, almost vulnerable. "Dance with me," it wasn't a question. He was already leading her toward where a small area had been cleared, where a few couples moved to the string quartet, playing something baroque and beautiful. She should have said no, should have made an excuse and left, returned to her real life, her safe existence where men like Cassian Blackwood didn't look at her as though they wanted to consume her whole. But she said yes. His hand settled on her waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder, and they began to move. He was a good dancer, leading with the kind of assured control that made it effortless to follow, and for a few minutes they existed in a bubble where the rest of the world ceased to matter. She was aware of him with every nerve in her body, the heat of his hand through the thin fabric of her dress, the scent of his cologne mixing with something uniquely him, the way he looked at her as though memorizing every detail of her face. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. "What is?" "This, you the way you're looking at me. And how am I looking at you? Like you want to possess me." His hand tightened on her waist, pulling her infinitesimally closer. "Would that be so terrible?" "Yes," she said, but her voice betrayed her, came out breathless, uncertain. "You're lying." "I'm trying to be sensible." Sensible is overrated. The music shifted, became something slower, and he took advantage, bringing her closer still, until they were barely moving, just swaying together, their bodies aligned in a way that felt profoundly intimate. "Tell me something true, Elena. I don't know you well enough to tell you truths. Then tell me a lie. Something beautiful." She looked up at him, at this man who was so clearly dangerous, so obviously wrong for her in every conceivable way, and felt something inside her shift, like a door opening that she had kept locked for 28 years. "I'm not afraid of you." "That's not a lie," he said softly. "That's the truest thing anyone has said to me in years." They stayed like that, moving together, until the music ended and reality reasserted itself. People were watching them now, whispering, speculating. Cassian Blackwood dancing with an unknown woman, holding her as though she was something precious, looking at her as though everyone else had ceased to exist. It would be in the gossip columns by morning, she realized. Her name would be attached to his, and her simple life would become complicated. "I should go," she said, stepping back, instantly missing his warmth. "Don't." It came out almost harsh, a command, but then he softened it. "Please have dinner with me." "I don't think that's a good idea." "Probably not." "Have dinner with me anyway." She should have said no, should have walked away, returned to her safe existence, forgotten this night and this man who looked at her as though she held the answer to questions he had never dared to ask. But something in his eyes, some desperate hunger that mirrored her own, made her hesitate. "One dinner," she found herself saying. "That's all." "One dinner," he agreed, but they both knew it was a lie. He gave her his number, written on the back of his business card, in a firm, decisive hand. She took it, slipped it into a small purse, and then she did leave, walking out of the museum into the London night, her heart pounding, her hands shaking, knowing with absolute certainty that she had just made either the best or worst decision of her life. She didn't call him. For 3 days she carried that card in her purse, taking it out occasionally to look at it, running her fingers over the embossed letters of his name, trying to convince herself that she could simply throw it away and forget. But she couldn't forget. He haunted her thoughts, invaded her dreams, made her restless in a way she had never experienced before. On the 4th day, he appeared at her school. She was in her classroom after hours, grading essays on Ovid's Metamorphoses, when there was a knock on the door. She looked up, expecting another teacher or perhaps a forgotten student, and found Cassian Blackwood leaning against the doorframe, looking entirely out of place in his three-piece suit among the shabby desks and fading posters of Latin declensions. "How did you find me?" she asked, too startled to be anything but direct. "I'm very good at finding things I want." He stepped into the room, looking around with interest at the evidence of her life. The books piled on every surface, the student artwork pinned to a bulletin board, the small plant on her desk she kept forgetting to water. "You didn't call. I was trying to be sensible. I thought we agreed sensible was overrated." He picked up one of the student essays, read a few lines, set it down carefully. "They're lucky to have you. What do you want, Cassian?" He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You know what I want. One dinner. That's what we agreed. Then have dinner with me tonight." "I can't. I have work to finish. And I'm not dressed for wherever you probably want to go, and this is insane. You barely know me." He crossed to her desk in 2 strides, placed his hands on the surface, leaned down until their faces were level. "I haven't stopped thinking about you for 4 days. I've tried. I've buried myself in work. I've had meetings with people far more important than you should be, and all I can think about is the way you looked at me when we danced. The way you challenged me. The way you didn't flinch when I touched you. So yes, this is insane, and no, I don't know you, but I want to. And I think you want to know me too, even though you're terrified of what that means." She should have been offended by his presumption, his arrogance, the way he had invaded her space and her life without invitation. But he was right, damn him. She did want to know him. She wanted it with an intensity that frightened her, because Elena Carter was not impulsive, did not make reckless decisions, did not let dangerous men into her carefully controlled life. "One dinner," she heard herself say again. "One dinner," he agreed, and this time they both knew they were lying to themselves. He took her to a private dining room at the Ledbury, a restaurant she had only read about in magazines, the kind of place where reservations were made months in advance, and meals cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. But the opulence felt secondary to the way he looked at her across the candlelit table. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as though her words were the most fascinating thing he had ever heard. They talked about everything and nothing. Her childhood at the convent, though she left out the darkest parts, the loneliness that had been a constant companion. His business, though he spoke of it with a cynicism that suggested he saw through his own success to the emptiness beneath. Her students, his acquisitions, her love of ancient texts, his inability to trust anyone completely. "Why Latin?" he asked at one point. "They're of all the things you could have studied. Because it's the language of permanence. Empires fall, languages die, but Latin endures. It's the foundation everything else is built on. And because," she paused, searching for the right words, "because when I was young and alone and didn't understand why my mother left me, why I was different from the other girls, I found comfort in the idea that people 2,000 years ago felt the same things I was feeling. That pain and love and fear are universal, that I wasn't as alone as I felt." He reached across the table, took her hand in his. "You're remarkable. I'm ordinary." "No," he said firmly. "That's the one thing you're not." The meal stretched into hours. Wine was poured and mostly forgotten. Dessert arrived and went cold as they talked. And through it all she felt herself falling, tumbling into something she had no name for, drawn to this man who should have been all wrong for her, but felt somehow inevitable. When he drove her home, a sleek black car that probably cost more than her annual salary, she directed him to her small flat in Elephant and Castle, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the gap between their worlds. He parked outside the converted Victorian house, where she rented 2 rooms on the top floor, and for a moment they sat in silence, the engine ticking as it cooled, London humming around them. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "Elena." The way he said her name was almost reverent. "I want to see you again. This is madness. We come from completely different worlds." "I don't care about worlds. I care about you." She looked at him, at this powerful, dangerous man who was looking at her as though she held the key to something he desperately needed, and felt her careful defenses crumbling. "I'm not like the women you're used to. I know. I don't know how to play games. I don't know how to be casual about things that matter. Good, I don't want games. I don't want casual. What do you want? He reached out, cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I want you. All of you. In ways I don't entirely understand and probably shouldn't admit. She should have been frightened by the possessiveness in his voice, the hunger in his eyes. But instead she felt something inside her kindle to life, an answering want that both thrilled and terrified her. Cassian, I need to tell you something. Tell me. But the words caught in her throat. How did she explain to this worldly, experienced man that she had never been touched, never been kissed, never surrendered any part of herself to anyone? That if she gave herself to him, it would be a gift she had never given before and could never give again? Not yet, she said instead, but soon. I promise. He studied her face and she wondered what he saw there, what truths he could read in her eyes. I'm not a patient man, Elena. I'm not asking you to be patient. I'm asking you to trust me. He leaned forward, and she thought he was going to kiss her, wanted him to kiss her with a desperation that shocked her. But instead he pressed his lips to her forehead, a gesture that was somehow more intimate than any kiss could have been. I'll trust you, but know that I'm not going anywhere. You're mine now, whether you're ready to admit it or not. She should have been offended by the claim, the arrogance of it, but something primitive in her responded to those words, to being claimed, to being wanted with such fierce certainty. She nodded, unable to speak, and slipped out of the car, feeling his eyes on her all the way to her door. That night she lay in bed, unable to sleep, her body humming with wants she had never acknowledged before, her mind spinning with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. She had spent her entire life being careful, being controlled, being safe. And now, in the space of one evening with one man, all of that careful construction felt like it was crumbling. She knew she should be afraid, but all she felt was alive. The following weeks unfolded like a fever dream, each day bleeding into the next with an intensity that left Elena breathless and slightly unmoored. Cassian pursued her with the single-minded focus he brought to everything, but there was nothing calculated about the way he looked at her, touched her, needed her. He showed up at her school with coffee and pastries from bakeries she'd never heard of, sat in the back of her classroom watching her teach, with an expression that made her stumble over her words, sent her books he thought she'd like with notes written in his decisive hand. He was overwhelming. He was everywhere, and she found she didn't want him to stop. They fell into a pattern, dinners at restaurants that took months to get into, walks along the South Bank at night when the city glittered like something out of a dream, conversations that stretched until dawn about philosophy and loss and the nature of desire. He told her about his father's death, about finding the body himself when he was 23, about the questions that were never answered and the investigation that concluded too quickly. He told her about his mother's descent into madness, how she had looked at him near the end and seen a stranger, how he'd had to sign the papers that committed her, and how that signature had felt like betrayal. Elena listened, held his hand, offered the kind of understanding that had nothing to do with words, and slowly, carefully, she told him her own truths. About the night her mother disappeared when she was 7, leaving her alone in their council flat for 3 days before neighbors heard her crying. About the social workers and the temporary homes, and finally the convent, where Sister Mary Catherine had seen something in her worth saving. About growing up knowing she was unwanted, that her mother had chosen to leave her, and how that knowledge had shaped every decision she'd made since. She didn't deserve you, Cassian said fiercely one night, his arms around her as they sat on a bench overlooking the Thames, the water dark and moving beneath them. Whatever her reasons, whatever her circumstances, she didn't deserve you. Sometimes I wonder if I could have been different, been better, made her want to stay. He turned her face to his expression almost angry. Don't ever think that. You were a child. Whatever happened, it wasn't your fault. Intellectually, I know that, but knowledge and feeling are different things. Then feel this, he said, and kissed her for the first time. It was nothing like she'd imagined a first kiss would be. There was nothing tentative or exploratory about it. He kissed her like he was drowning and she was air, like he'd been starving and she was sustenance, with a hunger that should have frightened her, but instead ignited something equally fierce inside her. His hand threaded through her hair, tilting her head back, and she opened to him without thinking, without fear, her own hands fisting in his shirt, as though she could anchor herself against the intensity of what she was feeling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want you," he said, and there was something almost anguished in his voice. "God, Elena, I want you so much it's destroying me." "I know," she whispered. "I want you too." "Then come home with me, tonight." And there it was, the invitation she'd known was coming, had been both hoping for and dreading. She pulled back slightly, needing to see his face. "Cassian, I need to tell you something first. Something important." "Tell me." The words felt impossible, too big for her throat. She'd spent 28 years protecting this secret, this fundamental truth about herself, and now she was about to hand it to this man who already had too much power over her. I haven't." She took a breath, forced herself to meet his eyes. "I've never been with anyone, never been touched, never wanted anyone enough to let them in. Until you." The silence stretched between them, thick with implications. His eyes searched hers, looking for doubt or fear or regret, but she gave him only truth. Finally he spoke, and his voice was rough, almost broken. "You're telling me no one has ever touched you? Never kissed you before tonight?" "No one. Why me? Why now?" "I don't know. Because you see me. Because you're broken in ways that match my broken. Because when I'm with you, I feel less alone than I've felt my entire life." She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. "Because I trust you even though I probably shouldn't." He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was something like fear in their depths. "Elena, I don't know how to be gentle. I don't know how to be what you deserve. I don't want gentle. I want real. I want you. If we do this," he said slowly, carefully, "if you give me this gift, I won't let you go. I won't be able to. You need to understand that. I'm not a good man. I'm selfish and possessive, and I'll want all of you, every part, every secret, every breath. And I won't know how to give you back the same wholeness in return. Maybe I don't want wholeness. Maybe I want broken as long as it's honest." He pulled her to him again, kissed her with something that felt like desperation, like gratitude, like damnation. "Come home with me," he said against her lips. "Let me worship you the way you deserve. Let me be the first and last man to touch you." She should have hesitated. Should have thought about the consequences, the inevitable complications, the fact that she was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But all she could think was yes, yes, yes. A litany in her mind that drowned out every rational thought. "Yes," she said aloud. Hand felt him shudder against her. His home was a converted warehouse in Shoreditch, all exposed brick and industrial steel, softened by expensive furnishings and art that probably cost more than her school's annual budget. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the space was open and masculine and somehow lonely despite its beauty, as though it had been waiting for something to make it feel like a home, rather than just a place to exist. He poured them wine, but neither of them drank it. The tension between them was electric, charged with want and fear and the weight of what was about to happen. Eleanor stood by the windows, looking out at London spread beneath them, trying to calm her racing heart. She felt him approach, felt the heat of him at her back before he touched her. His hands settled on her shoulders, and she leaned back instinctively, seeking his strength. "Are you afraid?" he asked quietly. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of you, of this, of how much I want it." He turned her to face him, and in the dim light his face was all shadows and sharp angles. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can wait. I don't want to wait. I've been waiting my whole life." She reached up, traced the line of his jaw, marveling at her own boldness. "I want you, Cassian. All of you, tonight." Something broke in his control. She saw it happen, saw the careful restraint he'd been maintaining shatter like glass. He kissed her again, harder this time, with none of the gentle exploration from before. This was claiming possession, need stripped of all pretense. His hands moved over her body, learning her shape through her clothes, and she arched into his touch, wanting more, wanting everything. "Bedroom," he managed, his voice harsh. "I need you in my bed." She nodded, unable to form words, and let him lead her through the loft to a room dominated by a massive bed. He turned on a single lamp, soft light that made everything feel dreamlike, unreal. And then he just looked at her, really looked, with an intensity that made her feel naked despite being fully clothed. "You're so beautiful," he said, almost reverently. "So perfect. And you're trusting me with something so precious, I don't deserve it. Don't deserve you. Stop thinking about what you deserve and just touch me, she said, and was rewarded with a flash of hunger in his eyes. He undressed her slowly, carefully, as though she was something fragile that might shatter. Each piece of clothing removed was accompanied by kisses, touches that made her gasp and shiver. When she finally stood before him in just her underwear, she fought the urge to cover herself, to hide. But the way he looked at her with something approaching awe made her feel powerful rather than vulnerable. Your turn, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. He pulled his shirt over his head in one smooth motion, and she sucked in a breath. His body was beautiful, powerfully built with scars that told stories she wanted to know. She reached out, traced one that ran across his ribs, and felt him tense under her touch. Where did you get this? A disagreement with someone who thought they could take something that belonged to me. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. I won. I always win. There was something dark in those words, a reminder that this man was dangerous in ways she didn't fully understand. But instead of frightening her, it thrilled her, made her want him more. She helped him with the rest of his clothes, and then they were both naked, skin to skin, and the sensation was so overwhelming she thought she might faint. He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him, and then he was over her, his weight pressing her into the mattress, and it felt right in a way nothing else in her life ever had. Tell me if it's too much, he said. Tell me if I hurt you. I'll stop. I swear I'll stop. Don't stop, she whispered. Don't ever stop. What followed was both more and less than she'd imagined. There was pain, yes, a sharp burning as he entered her that made her gasp and tense, but he moved slowly, carefully, whispering endearments and promises against her skin, kissing away the tears that leaked from the corners of her eyes. And then gradually the pain transformed into something else, something that built and built until she was moving with him, clutching at his shoulders, lost in sensations she had no name for. Look at me, he commanded, and she opened her eyes, met his gaze. I want to see you, want you to see me, want you to know who's claiming you. And as she fell apart in his arms, as pleasure crashed over her in waves that left her sobbing and shaking, she kept her eyes locked on his, giving him everything, holding nothing back. She watched as he followed her over the edge, saw the moment when his own control shattered, and felt a fierce possessive joy that she could do this to him, could make this powerful man lose himself inside her. After, they lay tangled together, sweat cooling on their skin, heartbeats slowly returning to normal. He held her as though she was something precious, stroking her hair, pressing kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Mine, he murmured. You're mine now. Yours, she agreed, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They made love twice more that night, and each time was different, a new discovery of pleasure and connection. By the time dawn began to creep through the windows, Eleanor felt fundamentally changed, as though she'd left one version of herself behind and emerged as someone new. Someone who knew what it was to be wanted, claimed, possessed, someone who had claimed in return. She woke to find him watching her, propped on one elbow, his free hand tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Morning, he said softly. Morning. She stretched, feeling deliciously sore in places she'd never been sore before. Do you always watch people sleep? It's slightly creepy. Only people I'm obsessed with. You're in rare company. She laughed, then sobered. What happens now? Now, he said, leaning down to kiss her. You move in with me, quit your job, and let me take care of you for the rest of your life. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her. I'm not quitting my job. Those kids need me. I need you. You have me. But I'm not giving up my life, Cassian. That's not what this is. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she couldn't quite read. I don't share well, Elena. That includes your time, your attention, your energy. Then you're going to have to learn. I'm not a possession you can lock away, aren't you? You said you were mine. Being yours doesn't mean I'm not still myself. She met his gaze steadily. I won't lose myself in you, no matter how much I want you. That's not love. That's erasure. He was quiet for a long moment, and she wondered if she'd pushed too hard, drawn a line that would make him walk away. But then he sighed, pulled her back down beside him. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this. At relationships, at letting people have their own lives separate from mine. Then we'll figure it out together. But you need to trust that I can be yours and still be me. I'm trying, he said, and she heard the honesty in his voice, the struggle. For you, I'm trying. The next few weeks felt like living in two separate realities. By day, she was Elena Carter, Latin teacher, grading papers and helping struggling students and fighting with the headmaster about budget cuts that would devastate her department. By night, she was Elena, Cassian's lover, sleeping in his bed, learning the geography of his body, discovering that intimacy was both simpler and more complicated than she'd ever imagined. He was insatiable, wanting her constantly, and she found she matched his hunger. They made love in every room of his loft, against windows overlooking the city, in the shower with water streaming over them, slow and tender in the early morning when they woke tangled together. He taught her things about her own body she'd never known, showed her pleasures she'd never imagined, and she discovered a capacity for passion that both thrilled and frightened her. But there were shadows, too, moments when she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something hungry and desperate and almost afraid. Phone calls he'd take in another room, speaking in low, urgent tones about deals and acquisitions and problems that needed to be handled, a hardness that would come over him sometimes, a reminder that beneath the lover was a man capable of ruthless things. One evening, about a month into their relationship, she arrived at his office unannounced. She'd finished early at school and thought she'd surprise him, maybe convince him to leave work for once and have a proper dinner somewhere normal. But when she reached his floor, she found his assistant looking flustered, and voices raised behind his closed office door. "You can't go in there right now," the assistant said. A severe woman in her 50s who usually treated Elena with barely concealed disdain. "Mr. Blackwood is in a meeting." "I'll wait," Eleanor said, settling into one of the uncomfortable modern chairs in the reception area. But the voices grew louder, and she couldn't help but hear. Cassian's voice, cold and cutting in a way she'd never heard directed at her. "I don't care what it takes. Clear them out by the end of the month. Use whatever legal mechanisms you need to use." "But, sir," another voice, younger, uncertain, "these are families. Some of them have been there for generations. Then they should have bought the property when they had the chance. I'm not running a charity. I'm running a business. If they can't afford market rates, that's not my problem." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known intellectually what Cassian did for a living. Property development, gentrification, the buying and selling of buildings and land. But hearing him speak so callously about displacing families, hearing the utter lack of compassion in his voice, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. The door opened, and a young man in an ill-fitting suit emerged, looking upset. He didn't even glance at Eleanor, just hurried toward the elevators. Cassian appeared in the doorway, irritation clear on his face, but it transformed to surprise when he saw her. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" I wanted to surprise you, but I think I'm the one who's surprised." He ushered her into his office, closed the door. The space was as she remembered, all glass and steel and expensive furniture, with views of London that reminded her of how high above everyone else he lived. "You heard that conversation?" "I did. And you're upset." "I'm trying to understand. Those families you were talking about are living in a building I purchased, a building that's being redeveloped into luxury flats. It's business, Elena, nothing personal. It's personal to them. It's their homes." He sighed, loosened his tie. "You can't look at business through the lens of individual hardship. If I did that, I'd never get anything done. The property market operates on certain principles that prioritize profit over people." "Yes," he said flatly. "That's exactly what they do. That's what business is. And it's what's given me the resources to help fund your school, to donate to charities, to keep things running. The money has to come from somewhere. So you displace people from their homes to fund charity galas. Don't you see how perverse that is?" "No," he said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I see how the world actually works. I see reality while you hide in idealism and pretend that good intentions are enough." The words stung, but she pushed forward. "Is that what you think? That I'm naive, hiding from reality? I think you're good in a way I'm not. Pure in a way I can never be, and I think that's part of why I want you so much. You're everything I'm not, but that doesn't change what I am, Elena. I told you I wasn't a good man. You said you were okay with that. I thought I was, but hearing you dismiss those families so casually, Would you prefer I pretend to care? He moved closer, his expression hard. Would you like me to mouth platitudes about how difficult these decisions are? How much I wish things were different? That's what most men in my position do. They hide behind corporate language and PR statements and pretend their hands are clean. I won't do that. Not with you. I am exactly what I appear to be. A man who builds empires on ruins and doesn't apologize for it. She stared at him, this man she'd given herself to, trying to reconcile the tender lover with the cold businessman. I don't know if I can accept that. Then don't walk away. Go back to your safe life teaching dead languages to children who will probably end up in service jobs anyway. Pretend that you can save the world one Latin lesson at a time and forget you ever met me. The words were brutal, designed to hurt, and they did. But beneath the anger she heard something else, fear. He was afraid she would leave and he was trying to push her away before she could. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No, he said, and his voice broke slightly. No, that's the last thing I want. But I need you to see me clearly, Elena. All of me. The parts that would do anything for you, and the parts that would destroy anyone who got in my way. I need you to decide if you can live with that. She thought about the families being displaced, about the countless others his business had probably affected over the years. She thought about her students, many of whom lived in buildings owned by men exactly like Cassian, at the mercy of market forces they couldn't control. And she thought about the man who held her at night, who looked at her as though she was his salvation, who had given her a kind of intimacy she'd never dreamed possible. I don't know if I can, she said honestly, but I'm not ready to walk away either. I need time to think. Then think, but do it here. Stay with me tonight. I don't think that's a good idea. I need space. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, go think, but Elena, he caught her hand as she turned to leave. Whatever you decide, know that I'm not letting you go easily. You're mine. That doesn't change because we disagree. She pulled her hand free, disturbed by the possessiveness in his tone, by the way her body responded to it, despite her mind's objections. I'm not a possession, Cassian. Aren't you? His eyes were dark, intense. You gave yourself to me, completely. That means something. It means I trust you, not that I belong to you. In my world, those are the same thing. She left without answering, feeling his eyes on her all the way to the elevator. And as she rode down to street level, emerging into a London evening that smelled of rain and exhaust, she wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. Not in leaving, but in getting involved with him in the first place. She spent that night in her own flat, which felt strange and small after Cassian's loft, like returning to a life that no longer fit. She tried to grade papers but couldn't focus, tried to read but the words blurred together. Finally, she just sat by her window, looking out at the ordinary street below, and tried to sort through the tangle of her feelings. She loved him. That was the terrifying truth she'd been avoiding. Somewhere in the past weeks, she'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with Cassian Blackwood. And love, she was discovering, was more complicated than any book had prepared her for. It wasn't simple or pure or uncomplicated. It was loving someone despite their flaws, or maybe because of them. It was seeing the worst parts of someone and choosing them anyway. But could she live with who he was? Could she reconcile the tender lover with the ruthless businessman? Could she be with someone whose success came at the cost of others' suffering? Her phone rang, and she knew without looking it would be him. She let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message, his voice rough with emotion. Elena, I know you need space, and I'm trying to respect that, but I need you to know something. I'm not sorry for who I am or what I do. I can't be. But I am sorry if I hurt you, and I'm sorry I'm not the man you deserve. Call me, please. She almost did. Her finger hovered over the callback button, but instead she set the phone aside and tried to sleep. The next morning she arrived at school to find chaos. The headmaster had called an emergency staff meeting, and when they gathered in the assembly hall, his face was grim. I'm afraid I have bad news. The building has been sold. The new owners are planning to redevelop the property, and we've been given notice to vacate by the end of term. Elena felt the world tilt. Sold to whom? Blackwood Properties. The name hit her like a physical blow. She sat frozen as the headmaster continued talking about relocating, about trying to find new premises, about the challenges ahead. But all she could hear was that name over and over. Blackwood Properties. Cassian's company. The man she loved was destroying the place she'd devoted her life to. It couldn't be a coincidence. He knew where she worked. He knew how much it meant to her. And he'd bought it anyway, was planning to tear it down and build luxury flats that none of her students' families could afford. She left the meeting early, ignoring the concerned calls of her colleagues, and went straight to his office. This time she didn't wait for permission, just pushed past his startled assistant and threw open his door. He was on a conference call, but one look at her face and he ended it abruptly. "Elena, you bought my school." Her voice was shaking with rage, with betrayal. "You knew what it meant to me and you bought it anyway." He stood, moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. Don't come near me. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you manipulated me, used me. Was this whole thing just a game to you? Sleep with the naive teacher, while you destroy everything she cares about?" "No." His voice was hard, urgent. "That's not what happened. I didn't what? Didn't know? Don't lie to me, Cassian. Not now." He ran a hand through his hair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. "I didn't buy it because of you. The deal was in motion months before we met. But yes, I knew. When I found out where you worked, I knew. And you didn't think to mention it? To tell me you were planning to tear down the school where I teach? Would it have changed anything? Would you have let me explain the economics, the structural problems with the building, the fact that it's not viable long-term? You're not tearing it down because it's not viable. You're tearing it down because you can make more money building luxury flats." "Yes," he said simply. "That's exactly why. Because that's what I do, Elena. That's who I am. I told you that." She felt tears burning her eyes, betrayal and anger and heartbreak all mixed together. "I thought you were different with me. I thought I meant something." "You do mean something. You mean everything." He closed the distance between them, grabbed her shoulders. "I love you. God help me, I love you in a way I didn't think I was capable of. But that doesn't change who I am or what I do." She stared at him, this man who claimed to love her while destroying what she loved. Love isn't supposed to hurt like this. Maybe it is. Maybe real love is painful and complicated and impossible, and we do it anyway because the alternative is worse. "I can't do this." She pulled away from him. "I can't be with someone who would do this." "Yes, you can. Because you love me too. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. You're angry and hurt, but you love me. That's not enough. It has to be enough. Because I'm not letting you go." "You don't have a choice." She backed toward the door, feeling as though her heart was being ripped out. "We're done, Cassian. This is over." She saw something break in his expression, saw him reach for her. "Elena, please." But she was already gone, running for the elevator, running from the building, from him, from the catastrophic mistake she'd made in trusting him with her heart. She made it to the street before the tears came, and then she was sobbing as she walked, drawing stares from passers-by but not caring, feeling as though everything inside her had shattered. She had given him everything. Her body, her trust, her love. And he had taken it all and given her devastation in return. She should have known better. Should have protected herself. Should have remembered that men like Cassian Blackwood didn't change, didn't compromise, didn't let anything as inconvenient as love interfere with their empire building. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. Didn't stop her from feeling as though she'd lost something essential, something she'd never get back. She'd given him her virginity, her trust, the carefully guarded heart she'd protected for 28 years. And now she was left with nothing but the ache of his absence, and the knowledge that she'd been a fool to think she could be enough to change him. She didn't know, as she fled through London's indifferent streets, that Cassian stood at his office window watching her go. His own face wet with tears he hadn't shed in 15 years, didn't know that he'd picked up the phone and cancelled the St. Benedict's acquisition, willing to lose millions rather than lose her. Didn't know that he'd finally understood too late that some things were worth more than empire. She only knew the pain, and that, she thought, might be all she had left of him. 3 weeks passed like an open wound that refused to heal. Eleanor threw herself into her work with desperate intensity, staying late at the school even though she knew its days were numbered, helping students who didn't know that soon they'd be scattered across London, to different schools, different futures. She avoided anything that reminded her of Cassian, which meant avoiding half of London, since his presence seemed to haunt every expensive restaurant, every gallery, every corner where they'd walked together in what now felt like a different lifetime. She didn't answer his calls. There were dozens of them at first, then fewer, then none. He sent flowers that she threw away without reading the cards. He sent letters she burned unopened. Once he showed up at her flat at 2 in the morning, and she'd stood on the other side of the door listening to him beg, her hand pressed against the wood as though she could feel his heartbeat through it, tears streaming down her face as she forced herself to remain silent until he finally left. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that she couldn't be with a man whose empire was built on the displacement of families, whose success meant other people's suffering, that love without compatible values was just mutual destruction in slow motion. But God, she missed him with an ache that was physical, that woke her in the night reaching for him, that made her catch his scent on the street and turn, hoping before remembering. Her body remembered his touch, craved it with an intensity that terrified her. She'd given him her virginity, her trust, and even though her mind knew leaving was right, her heart felt like it was dying. Her students noticed. "Miss Carter, are you feeling all right?" asked Amara, one of her brightest pupils, a girl from Somalia who wanted to be a doctor. "You seem sad." "I'm fine, Amara, just tired. My mother says that when English people say they're fine, it means they're falling apart, but are too polite to admit it." Elena had laughed despite herself. "Your mother is very wise. She also says that the heart is stupid and doesn't understand logic. That sometimes we love people who hurt us, and the only thing we can do is survive it." "Also wise," Elena said softly, wondering if her pain was really so obvious that a 15-year-old could diagnose it. What she didn't know was that Cassian was falling apart too. His assistant had quietly spread the word that he was not to be disturbed unless it was absolutely critical, that his temper was volcanic, that the man who usually maintained perfect control was unraveling. He'd lost weight, stopped sleeping, drove himself with work, until exhaustion was the only thing that could quiet his mind for a few hours. He'd cancelled the St. Benedict's acquisition the same day Elena left, had walked into a board meeting and announced they were pulling out of the deal, absorbing the penalties, taking the loss. When the board members had protested, he'd looked at them with dead eyes and said, "I don't care. Find another project." And they had, because no one argued with Cassian Blackwood when he looked like that. But it didn't matter. The gesture was too late, and she wouldn't answer his calls to tell her. He'd tried to fix it, and succeeded only in proving that he was capable of change when it was already too late to matter. Marcus Chen, his closest thing to a friend, found him drunk in his office at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, staring at his phone like it held the answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. Marcus was one of his lawyers, a Harvard graduate who'd proven himself ruthless enough to be useful and loyal enough to be trusted. And he'd known Cassian long enough to recognize a crisis when he saw one. "This is about her, isn't it?" The teacher— "Don't," Cassian said, his voice rough with whiskey and sleeplessness. "Don't talk about her. You're destroying yourself." "Over a woman you knew for what, 2 months?" 8 weeks and 4 days. Cassian laughed bitterly. "I sound like a lovesick teenager. I'm 38 years old, I've built an empire, I've negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, and I'm falling apart because one woman won't answer my calls. So move on. There are plenty of women who would. I don't want plenty of women. I want her. Only her." He looked at Marcus, and there was something broken in his expression. "I thought I understood what it meant to want something, to need something, but I didn't, not until her. She's not a deal I can negotiate or an acquisition I can force through. She's the first thing in my life I can't control, and it's destroying me." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I really love her. Yes, God help me, yes. And I've lost her because I'm exactly what she accused me of being. A man who builds empires on ruins and doesn't apologize for it. Then change, become someone she could love. That's the problem. She did love me. I saw it in her eyes, heard it in her voice. She loved me exactly as I was, broken and ruthless and wrong for her in every way. But she couldn't live with the consequences of what I do. And I don't know how to be anyone else." What neither of them knew was that they were being watched, that their meeting, their falling in love, the devastation that followed had all been orchestrated by someone who understood that the best way to destroy a man wasn't to attack his empire, but to give him something precious, and then take it away. Malcolm Hartley had been watching Cassian Blackwood for years, waiting for the right moment, the right weapon. He was older, in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of distinguished appearance that made people trust him. He'd been partners with Cassian's father decades ago, before everything went wrong, before the betrayal that had cost him everything. He blamed the Blackwood family for his ruin, for the business deals that had fallen through, the investments that had failed, the slow descent from wealth to merely comfortable. But more than that, he blamed them for his daughter's death. She'd been engaged to Cassian's father, had loved him desperately, and when he'd broken the engagement to marry Cassian's mother instead, she'd spiraled into depression and eventually killed herself. Malcolm had spent 20 years nursing that grief, letting it curdle into hatred, planning his revenge. And when he'd discovered Elena Carter, when he'd learned her history and realized the perfect symmetry of it, he'd known he'd found his weapon. It had been easy to manipulate the invitation list for that charity gala. Easy to ensure Elena received the invitation meant for Sister Mary Catherine. Easy to plant them in the same room and let nature take its course. He'd known Cassian's type, had watched him go through women like they were interchangeable. But Elena was different, pure and idealistic and strong, exactly the kind of woman who could get past Cassian's defenses. And she had. Malcolm had watched them fall in love with a satisfaction that felt like vindication. Had watched Cassian become vulnerable for the first time in his life, and then he'd made his move, ensuring the St. Benedict's acquisition went through in a way that would guarantee Elena discovered it at the worst possible moment. He'd expected pain, expected a breakup, suffering, perhaps a wound that would heal with time. But what he was seeing exceeded his expectations. Cassian Blackwood was genuinely destroyed, and Malcolm found he enjoyed it more than he'd anticipated. But he wasn't done. The real revelation, the one that would truly devastate them both, was still to come. Because Malcolm knew something neither of them did. Something about Elena's mother, about her death, about the connection between their families that went back decades. He had documents, photographs, proof of things that would make Elena question everything she knew about herself, and make Cassian understand that their connection was rooted in tragedy that predated them both. But timing was everything. He needed to wait for the right moment, when they were both at their weakest, when the truth would do maximum damage. So he watched and waited, a spider at the center of a web they didn't even know they were caught in. Elena discovered the first thread of that web by accident. She was going through old files at the school, trying to prepare materials for the transition to whatever new location they might find, when she came across a box of archived documents from decades past. They were scheduled to be destroyed in the move, and she was sorting through them to see if anything was worth saving when she found it. A photograph, yellowed with age, dated 1997. A group of people at some kind of formal event, and in the background, barely visible, was a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. Elena stared at the face, feeling something cold settle in her stomach. The woman had her eyes, her bone structure, her dark hair. She looked no older than Elena was now. She flipped the photograph over. Written on the back in faded ink, St. Benedict's Foundation Gala, 1997. L. Hartley, M. Blackwood, others. Blackwood. The name jumped out at her like an accusation. She looked at the photo again, searching the faces, and found him. A man in his 40s, handsome and assured, standing next to a woman who must have been Cassian's mother. They looked happy, untouched by the tragedy that would claim them both. But it was the woman in the background who held Elena's attention. L. Hartley. Could it be? Could this be her mother? Elena had almost no information about her mother. The social workers had told her the woman's name was Laura, that she'd died in a car accident 2 years after abandoning Eleanor, that there were no other relatives, no one to claim her or explain why she'd left her 7-year-old daughter alone in a council flat for 3 days. It had always felt incomplete, full of holes, but Eleanor had been a child and then a teenager, and then an adult trying to move forward, and she'd never had the resources or knowledge to investigate further. But now, staring at this photograph, she felt something shift. A possibility opening up, or maybe a Pandora's box that should have remained closed. She took the photo to Sister Mary Catherine, who was still alive at 83, living in a retirement home for clergy in Kent. The old nun's eyes were failing, but she held the photograph close, squinting at it, and then something passed over her face. Recognition and something else. Fear. Where did you find this? She asked carefully. At the school. In old archives. Sister Mary, do you know this woman? The one in the background. Is this my mother? The silence stretched so long, Eleanor thought the old woman wouldn't answer. Finally she sighed, and it sounded like surrender. Yes, that's Laura Hartley. Your mother. Hartley. Eleanor's throat felt tight. Why didn't you tell me her last name? Why was it kept from me? Because we were asked to. By the family. They wanted no connection to you, wanted you to have no claim on them. What family? Sister Mary, please, I need to know. The old nun closed her eyes. I'm breaking a confidence I've kept for 28 years. But perhaps it's time. Laura Hartley was the daughter of Malcolm Hartley, a businessman who had connections to many wealthy families in London. She fell in love with a man who was already engaged to someone else. When he chose the other woman, Laura fell apart. She became pregnant, we never knew by whom, and had you, but she couldn't cope. Depression, we'd call it now. Back then, we just knew she was broken, and she abandoned me. Yes, she left you with a neighbor and disappeared. We thought she'd run away, perhaps killed herself. But 2 years later, we received notification that she'd died in a car accident in Manchester. The family didn't want anything to do with you. They paid for your care at the convent on the condition that you never contact them, never know who they were. Elena felt like the ground was tilting beneath her. Did you know the man she loved? The one who rejected her? Sister Mary Catherine opened her eyes, and they were filled with sorrow. His name was Marcus Blackwood, Cassian's father. The world stopped. Elena sat frozen, unable to process what she'd just heard. Her mother had loved Cassian's father, had been destroyed by him, had brought Elena into the world in the aftermath of that destruction, and then couldn't bear to keep her. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. I'm sorry, child. I never wanted you to know. It's ancient history, tragedy piled on tragedy. But yes, your mother loved Marcus Blackwood. And when he married Cassian's mother instead, it destroyed her. Does that mean... Eleanor couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the horrible possibility. Are you asking if Marcus Blackwood was your father? Sister Mary Catherine shook her head firmly. No, I can say that with certainty. The timing doesn't work. And Laura told me herself that Marcus never touched her, that he'd been faithful to his fiancée. Your father was someone else, someone she met in her grief, someone whose name she never told me. Relief flooded through Eleanor so powerfully she felt dizzy. She and Cassian weren't related. That horror, at least, wasn't true. But the connection between their families, the fact that her very existence was rooted in pain caused by his father, felt like a curse. There's something else, Sister Mary Catherine said slowly. Something I've wondered about over the years but could never prove. Laura's death, the car accident. The police said she was driving drunk, that she lost control and crashed. But I always thought it was convenient, too neat. Malcolm Hartley was a ruthless man, and having a daughter who was a reminder of his family's shame couldn't have pleased him. You think he killed her? Elena felt cold all over. I think he might have helped her die, or looked the other way when she was self-destructing. I have no proof, just an old woman's suspicions. But the Hartleys and the Blackwoods, child, they're families with blood on their hands going back generations. And you're caught between them. Elena left the retirement home feeling like she'd been shattered and poorly reassembled. Everything she'd thought she knew about herself, about her origins, had been a lie. And the man she loved, the man whose touch still haunted her dreams, was bound to her by threads of old tragedy and pain. She didn't know what to do with this information. Part of her wanted to go to Cassian immediately, to tell him what she'd learned, to see if this changed anything. But what would it change? He was still the man who'd bought her school, still the ruthless developer who displaced families without remorse. Learning that their families were connected by old wounds didn't erase any of that. But she needed answers. Needed to understand what had really happened to her mother, whether the old nun's suspicions had any merit. And there was only one person who might know the truth. Malcolm Hartley. It took her 2 days to find him. He wasn't listed in any public directory, but she used her connections at Cambridge, her old professors who knew people, and eventually got an address. A townhouse in Mayfair, elegant and expensive, exactly the kind of place where old money hid its secrets. She showed up unannounced, rang the bell, and when the door opened, found herself face to face with a distinguished older man who looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Yes? My name is Elena Carter. I think you knew my mother." Laura Hartley. She watched all the color drain from his face. For a moment, she thought he might close the door in her face, but instead he stepped back. "You'd better come in." The interior was exactly what she expected. Antiques and oil paintings, thick carpets, and the smell of old books and older money. He led her to a study, poured himself a drink without offering her one, and stood looking at her with something like wonder. "You look like her," he said finally. "Exactly like her at your age. I want to know what happened to my mother. The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I suppose you have a right to know. You're Laura's daughter, after all. My granddaughter." The word hung in the air between them. Granddaughter. She had family, however twisted and broken. "Why did you pay the convent to keep me away? Why didn't you want to know me?" "Because you were a reminder of everything I'd lost. Laura was my only child, my precious daughter, and she destroyed herself over a man who wasn't worth her pain. When she got pregnant, I was furious, humiliated. I couldn't bear to look at you because all I saw was her weakness, her failure. She was your daughter. She needed help and you abandoned her." "Yes," he said simply. "I did. And then I watched her spiral and I did nothing. When she died, part of me was relieved. No more embarrassment, no more reminder of how far we'd fallen. You want to know if I killed her? I didn't, but I might as well have. I let her die through my indifference." Elena felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "And Marcus Blackwood, did he know about me?" "No, he had his own problems by then. His wife was losing her mind. He was drinking himself to death. But I blame him for Laura's destruction. He courted her, made her fall in love with him, then cast her aside when a better prospect came along. The Blackwoods are users, Eleanor. They take what they want and destroy what they don't need. Like Cassian," she said quietly. Malcolm's eyes sharpened. "So you know him?" "Of course you do." "That's perfect, actually. Almost poetic." Something in his tone made her uneasy. "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just that history has a way of repeating itself. The Hartleys and the Blackwoods bound together by tragedy." He moved to his desk, pulled out a folder. "I have something for you. Your mother's effects. Things I kept because I couldn't bear to destroy them, even though I couldn't bear to look at them either." He handed her the folder, and with shaking hands, she opened it. Inside were photographs of a young woman who did indeed look eerily like Elena. Letters written in a hand that looked like her own. And at the bottom a journal, leather-bound and worn. "Her diary," Malcolm said. She kept it faithfully. "It's all in there. Her love for Marcus, her heartbreak, her pregnancy, her descent into darkness. Read it. Learn about your mother. And then decide if you still want anything to do with the Blackwood family." Elena clutched the journal to her chest, feeling as though she'd been given something infinitely precious and infinitely dangerous. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing it because you deserve to know the truth. And because," he paused, something cold in his eyes, "because the truth has a way of setting us free, even when it destroys us in the process." She left his house feeling more confused than ever, the journal heavy in her bag like a bomb waiting to explode. She went back to her flat, made tea she didn't drink, and finally, with trembling hands, opened the diary. Her mother's words reached across decades, raw and honest and heartbreaking. Elena read about Laura falling in love with Marcus Blackwood, about stolen moments and promises made in the dark. She read about the engagement to another woman, about Marcus's apologies that rang hollow, about Laura's devastation, and then on a page dated 9 months before Elena's birth, a single line that made her blood run cold. "I slept with M's business partner tonight. I don't even remember his name. I just wanted to hurt the way I'm hurting. I wanted to destroy something. Her father hadn't been someone her mother loved. He'd been a nameless encounter, a moment of self-destruction, a way to strike back at the man who'd broken her heart. Elena was the product of that pain, that revenge. That moment when her mother had been so broken, she'd stopped caring about consequences. She kept reading. Through her mother's pregnancy, through the birth, through the brief moments when Laura had tried to love her daughter and couldn't connect to this reminder of her worst moment. And finally, the last entry, dated 2 days before she'd abandoned Elena, I can't do this anymore. I look at her and see all my mistakes, my weakness, my failure. She deserves better than a mother who can't love her. I'm going to leave her somewhere safe, somewhere she'll be cared for, and then I'm going to disappear. Maybe if I'm far enough away, I'll be able to breathe again. Elena closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Her mother hadn't left because Elena was bad or wrong or unlovable. She'd left because she was too broken to stay, because Elena was a mirror reflecting back all her pain. It didn't make the abandonment hurt less, but it gave it context. Made it about Laura's wounds rather than Elena's worth. She cried for the mother she'd never known, for the woman who'd been destroyed by love and had destroyed herself in turn. And she cried for herself, for the little girl who'd been left behind, for the woman she'd become, who was now tangled in the same family legacy that had ruined her mother. She didn't know how long she sat there, but eventually her phone rang. She ignored it the first 2 times, but on the third she checked the screen. Unknown number. Something made her answer. Eleanor Carter, a woman's voice, professional, slightly nervous. Yes? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a solicitor with Hartley and Associates. I'm calling regarding your mother, Laura Hartley. There's been a development you should know about. Eleanor's heart began to pound. What kind of development? It would be better discussed in person. Are you available tomorrow at 2? Our offices are in the city. Yes, I'll be there. She hung up, staring at the phone, wondering what else could possibly be revealed. What other secrets were waiting to surface from the past? That night, for the first time in 3 weeks, she texted Cassian. A simple message, just 3 words. We need to talk. His response came within seconds, as though he'd been waiting with his phone in his hand. When and where? Tomorrow. After 3. Your place. I'll be there. She set down her phone and went to stand by the window, looking out at London at night, all those lives intersecting and diverging, all those stories tangling together. Somewhere out there, Cassian was probably standing at his own window, wondering what she wanted to say, hoping for reconciliation and fearing rejection. And somewhere else, Malcolm Hartley was pouring another drink, satisfied with the chaos he'd set in motion, waiting for the final pieces to fall into place. None of them knew the truth yet. None of them understood how deep the connections ran, how their families were bound together, not just by old tragedies, but by new ones, by secrets that hadn't yet surfaced but would soon. Elena pressed her hand against the cold glass and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would see him again, would smell his cologne and hear his voice and have to remember how to breathe, while her body screamed for his touch. Tomorrow she would tell him about her mother, about Malcolm, about the twisted connections between their families. And then perhaps they could decide whether their love was strong enough to survive the weight of history, or whether they were doomed to repeat the tragedies that had come before. She didn't know which outcome she was hoping for. She only knew that she couldn't keep running, couldn't keep hiding from the truth. Whatever came next, she would face it, even if it destroyed her, even if it destroyed them both. The solicitor's office was in one of those glass buildings in the city that seemed to exist in a different dimension from the rest of London, where money moved in invisible streams and deals worth millions were sealed with handshakes over coffee. Eleanor felt out of place in her simple dress and practical shoes, surrounded by people in expensive suits who moved with the confidence of those who'd never questioned their place in the world. Jennifer Walsh was younger than Elena expected, perhaps 40, with sharp eyes behind designer glasses and the kind of polished appearance that came from success earned rather than inherited. She stood when Elena entered her office, extended a hand and gestured to a leather chair that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Thank you for coming, Miss Carter. I'm sure this must be confusing. That's an understatement. You said this was about my mother? Jennifer settled back into her chair, folded her hands on the desk. I represent the estate of Laura Hartley, or rather, I represent the trust that was established in her name 30 years ago. I don't understand. My mother died with nothing. That's what I was always told. That's what everyone was told. But the truth is more complicated. Jennifer pulled out a file thick with documents. When Laura became pregnant with you, she did something Malcolm Hartley didn't know about. She went to a different solicitor, one her father didn't control, and she set up a trust. Not much, just £20,000. but she specified that it was to go to her child when that child turned 28, along with certain documents. Elena's heart was racing. What documents? A letter. And evidence. Evidence that her death wasn't an accident. Jennifer's expression was grave. Miss Carter, your mother knew she was in danger. She knew her father was capable of violence, and she documented everything. The trust was her insurance policy, her way of ensuring the truth would come out, even if she couldn't tell it herself. You're saying Malcolm killed her? Elena's voice came out barely above a whisper. I'm saying Laura believed he would, and 3 weeks after she wrote the letter establishing this trust, she died in a car accident that was ruled driver error. The police investigation was cursory at best, closed within days. Malcolm Hartley was a wealthy man with connections. It wouldn't have been difficult to ensure certain questions weren't asked. Jennifer slid an envelope across the desk. It was yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked over the decades. Elena's name was written on the front in handwriting she recognized from the diary. This is for you, along with the money from the trust, which has been growing for 28 years. With interest and investment, it's now worth approximately £300,000. Elena couldn't process the money. All she could see was the envelope, her mother's final words reaching across the years. With trembling hands, she broke the seal and pulled out several pages of careful handwriting. "My darling girl," it began, and Elena had to stop, had to breathe, had to remind herself that this was real. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're 28 years old, and I pray you've had a better life than I could give you. I'm writing this in case the worst happens, in case my father's anger and shame become more than threats. I need you to know the truth about your birth, about your father, about everything. I loved a man named Marcus Blackwood. He was engaged to another woman, but I loved him anyway, foolishly, completely. When he chose her over me, I fell apart. I did something terrible, something I'll regret until my dying day. I slept with his business partner, a man named Richard Morrison, not because I wanted him, but because I wanted revenge. I wanted Marcus to hurt the way I was hurting. Richard knew what I was doing. He participated knowing I was using him. And when I became pregnant with you, he disappeared. Left the country, from what I heard. Went to Australia and never looked back. So you see, my darling, your father is a man who didn't want you any more than I seem capable of wanting you. But here's what I need you to know. My inability to love you isn't about you. You're perfect. You're innocent. You're everything good in a situation born from my worst moment. I look at you and see my shame, my weakness, my failure. But that's my damage, not yours. You deserve so much better than a mother who's this broken. I'm leaving you because I think you'll have a better life without me. Sister Mary Catherine has promised to care for you, and she's a good woman, better than I could ever be. But I'm also leaving you this trust because I'm afraid. My father's anger has been growing. He says I've humiliated him, that having a bastard granddaughter he's expected to support is unforgivable. He's made threats, veiled but real, and I know what he's capable of. If something happens to me, if my death is anything but natural causes of old age, then you need to know, Malcolm Hartley is a dangerous man. Don't trust him. Don't let him hurt you the way he's hurt me. And one more thing, my darling girl. The Blackwoods and the Hartleys are families poisoned by old grudges and older pain. Marcus Blackwood is not your father, but his family and ours are tangled together in ways that breed nothing but suffering. If you ever meet his son Cassian, run. Run far and fast, because nothing good can come from a Hartley and a Blackwood together. We're cursed, all of us, by the choices of previous generations. I love you more than I'm capable of showing. I'm so sorry I'm not strong enough to be what you need. Be better than me. Be stronger. Be free of all of this. Your mother, Laura. Elena read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had loved her in her broken way. Had he tried to protect her even while abandoning her? And the warning about Cassian, written decades before they'd met, felt like prophecy. There's more, Jennifer said quietly. She pulled out another document, this one more recent, printed rather than handwritten. Laura also documented conversations with her father, threats he made, a diary of his abuse. And there's this. She pulled out a photograph. This was in Laura's safety deposit box. It's Malcolm Hartley and a police inspector, taken the week after Laura's death. Our investigator traced the inspector. He retired to Spain on a pension that was far more generous than his rank should have provided. The implication is clear. He paid the police to cover up her murder. Eleanor felt cold all over. We believe so, but proving it after all this time would be nearly impossible. The inspector is dead, Malcolm is elderly, and the evidence is all circumstantial. However, Jennifer leaned forward, Laura's trust came with instructions. She wanted you to have the truth, and she wanted you to have the means to be free of the Hartley family entirely. The money is yours to do with as you wish. You owe Malcolm Hartley nothing. Eleanor sat in silence, trying to absorb everything. Her mother hadn't been the weak, selfish woman she'd imagined. She'd been a victim, abused and ultimately murdered by her own father. But she'd fought back in the only way she could. She'd protected Elena with money and truth, had tried to give her daughter the freedom she'd never had herself. "Thank you," Elena managed finally, "for keeping this all these years, for making sure I knew. It's what Laura wanted. She loved you, Miss Carter. More than she knew how to show, but she loved you." Elena left the office in a daze, the letter and documents clutched to her chest. She walked through the city without seeing it, her mind spinning. Everything had changed. Everything she thought she knew about her mother, about her origins, about her place in the world. And Cassian. God, Cassian. She was supposed to see him in an hour, and she had no idea what to say. Her mother had warned her away from him, had seen the tragedy of their families colliding decades before it happened. But Laura had also been wrong about so many things, had let fear and pain guide her choices, and look where that had led. Elena didn't want to repeat her mother's mistakes, didn't want to let old curses and family grudges dictate her life. But she also couldn't ignore the very real obstacles between her and Cassian. His ruthlessness, his empire built on others' suffering, the fact that he'd bought her school and nearly destroyed the one place that mattered to her. She checked her phone. 17 missed calls from Cassian in the last hour. 3 texts, each more desperate than the last. "Please don't change your mind. Elena, I need to see you. I'll wait forever if I have to, but please come." She texted back, "I'm coming. I'm on my way." His response was instant. Thank God. She took the tube to Shoreditch, emerged into an afternoon that had turned grey and threatening rain. The walk to his building felt both too long and too short. She wasn't ready. She'd never be ready. But she was done running. He answered the door before she'd finished knocking, and the sight of him nearly broke her. He looked terrible, haggard and thin, with shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and the kind of suffering she'd thought men like him incapable of. But his eyes, God, his eyes when he looked at her, held such desperate hope mixed with fear that she had to look away. "Come in," he said, his voice rough. "Please." She stepped into the loft that had once felt like a haven and now felt like foreign territory. Everything was the same, but everything had changed. They stood in the living area, an awkward distance between them, and the silence stretched until it was almost unbearable. "You look like hell," she said finally. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "So do you. I've had a complicated few weeks. So have I." He moved toward her, stopped when she stepped back. Pain flashed across his face, but he held his ground. "Eleanor, before you say anything, I need to tell you something. I cancelled the St. Benedict's acquisition. The day you left, I walked into a board meeting and pulled out of the deal, took the financial hit, absorbed the penalties. The school is safe." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because you were right. Because I was choosing empire over humanity. And that's not a choice I want to make anymore. Because I love you more than I love money or power or any of it. And if keeping my empire means losing you, then to hell with the empire." That's a pretty speech, Cassian. But one grand gesture doesn't change who you are, what you do. "You're right." "It doesn't, but it's a start." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she remembered. "I've spent the last 3 weeks examining my life, my choices, the way I've built everything on the ruins of other people's dreams. And I don't like what I see. I don't like who I've become. I want to change. For you, yes, but also for myself. People don't change that fundamentally. Not really. Then I'll try anyway. Helena, I've been ruthless and cold and everything you accused me of being. But I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be better. You make me believe I could be better." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it ached, but she'd learned too much in the past day, carried too much weight. There's something you need to know. About my mother, about your father, about why we should never have met. She told him everything. About Laura and Marcus. About Malcolm's threats and Laura's murder. About the letter and the warning. She watched his face as she spoke, saw the horror and understanding dawn in his eyes. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father destroyed your mother. My family's choices led directly to your abandonment." "Jesus, Eleanor, the weight of that isn't yours to carry," she interrupted. "Your father made his choices. My grandfather made his. Neither of us is responsible for their sins. But we carry the consequences anyway." He moved to the window, looked out at London. "My father was a bastard. I've known that since I was old enough to understand. He cheated, he lied, he hurt everyone who loved him. My mother's madness wasn't random. It was years of abuse and betrayal wearing her down until there was nothing left. And then he died and left me to clean up his mess, to carry his empire forward. And I told myself I'd be different, told myself I'd be better. But I just became a different version of the same monster. You're not a monster, Cassian, aren't I?" He turned to face her. "I displace families. I gentrify neighborhoods. I put profit over people every single day. That meeting you overheard, the way I talked about those families, that's who I really am when I'm not trying to impress you." So change. Really change, not just one grand gesture, but actual sustained change. "Is that what you want? For me to become someone else?" "No," she said, and meant it. "I want you to become a better version of who you already are. I don't need you to be perfect, Cassian. I need you to be conscious, to care about the consequences of your choices, to understand that power comes with responsibility." He crossed to her then, slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. But she didn't move. She let him come close enough that she could feel his heat, smell his cologne, see the desperate hope in his eyes. "If I promise to try, if I promise to be better, will you give me another chance?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I want to. God, I want to. But I'm terrified. My mother fell in love with a Blackwood and it destroyed her. What if we're just repeating history? Then we'll write a different ending." He cupped her face in his hands, the gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. "Eleanor, I've spent 3 weeks in hell. I can't eat, can't sleep, can't focus on anything but the fact that you're not there. I love you. I love you in a way I didn't think I was capable of. And I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway." She closed her eyes, felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I love you too. That's the problem. I love you so much it terrifies me. Then be terrified with me. Let's be scared together. Let's make mistakes and fix them, and build something that's ours, not our parents' legacy. What if we can't? What if we're too damaged, too broken? Then we'll be broken together. Helen, look at me." She opened her eyes, met his gaze. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, or that changing who I am will be easy. But I promise I'll try. I promise I'll fight for us every single day. I promise you'll always come first, before business, before empire, before everything. That's a big promise. I'm a man who keeps his promises." She wanted to kiss him. Wanted it so badly she could barely breathe. But there was still one more thing, one more truth that needed to be spoken. Malcolm Hartley, my grandfather, he's dangerous, Cassian, and I think he's been manipulating us from the beginning. That got his attention. She told him about her visit to Malcolm, about his strange reaction when she mentioned Cassian's name, about the way he'd seemed almost pleased by their connection. "I think he orchestrated our meeting. I think he wanted us to fall in love so he could destroy us." Cassian's expression hardened into something dangerous. "That invitation, the one you received for the gala, you said it was meant for someone else. Sister Mary Catherine. She was on the list, but somehow it got transferred to me instead. Malcolm has connections to that charity. He's on the board." Cassian pulled out. His phone made a call. "Marcus, I need you to pull records. The Victoria and Albert Gala 3 months ago. I need to know who modified the guest list and when." He listened for a moment. "I don't care what time it is. Do it now." He hung up, looked at Eleanor. "If Malcolm arranged your invitation, if he's been playing puppet master this whole time, then we need to know why. What does he gain from our suffering?" "Revenge," Elena said quietly. "For my mother. For whatever grudge he's been nursing against your family for decades. He lost his daughter because of your father, and now he wants you to lose what you love. Then he's underestimated us." Cassian's voice was cold, controlled, the businessman she'd first met. "Because I'm not losing you again. Whatever game he's playing, we're going to end it." His phone rang. He answered, listened, his expression growing darker. "You're certain?" "And the payment. Trace it." He hung up, looked at Eleanor. Malcolm didn't just modify the guest list. He paid someone at the charity £5,000 to ensure you were seated at my table. He orchestrated the entire meeting. Elena felt sick. Everything from the beginning. Our entire relationship has been his manipulation. "No." Cassian took her hands, held them firmly. "He might have arranged our meeting, but he didn't make me fall in love with you." "He didn't make you fall in love with me. What we feel is real, Elena. That's the one thing he can't control. But what if he's still manipulating us? What if there's more we don't know? Then we find out. Together." He pulled her close and she went, finally allowing herself to rest against his chest, to hear his heartbeat, to feel safe for the first time in weeks. "We're going to confront him. We're going to end this." "When?" "Now, tonight, before he has time to do any more damage." They took Cassian's car to Mayfair, the drive tense with anticipation and anger. Elena told him about the letter, about the evidence of Malcolm's role in Laura's death, about the trust that had been hidden for decades. Cassian listened, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "He killed your mother," he said flatly, "and he's been free for 28 years. We can't prove it. Not legally. I don't need legal proof. I need truth." He glanced at her. "Trust me?" "Yes," she said, surprising herself with how certain she sounded. They pulled up outside Malcolm's townhouse just as rain began to fall. The building was lit from within, warm and inviting in a way that felt obscene given what they knew. Cassian rang the bell, and when a housekeeper answered, he simply said, "Tell Malcolm Hartley that Cassian Blackwood is here with his granddaughter. Tell him if he doesn't see us, I'll buy this building and evict him tomorrow." The housekeeper's eyes widened, but she stepped aside. They were led to the same study where Elena had met Malcolm before. He was there standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, and when he saw them together, his expression transformed into something triumphant. "Ah," he said, "the lovers reunited. How touching." "You orchestrated our meeting," Cassian said without preamble. "You paid to put Elena in my path, knowing I'd be attracted to her, knowing our family's history. Why?" Malcolm smiled, and it was ugly. "Why? Because I wanted you to feel what my daughter felt. To love someone completely, and then lose them to circumstances beyond your control. I wanted you to suffer the way she suffered." "I'm not my father," Cassian said coldly. "No, but you're his legacy. His empire, his methods, his cruelty. You're everything Marcus Blackwood would have become if he'd lived, and I wanted to destroy that. I wanted to watch you fall in love and then watch that love become impossible. By using me," Elena said, her voice shaking with anger. "By manipulating my life like I'm a piece on your chessboard. You were always just a piece, child. From the moment Laura birthed you, you were a means to an end. She understood that in her way. Why do you think she left you? She left because you drove her away. Because you made her life unbearable. I gave her everything." Malcolm's composure cracked, showing the rage beneath. Education, status, a name that meant something. And she threw it all away for a man who didn't want her. Got herself pregnant like a common whore, and then expected me to just accept the humiliation. "So you killed her," Elena said flatly. The silence was electric. Malcolm's face went still, calculating. "You can't prove that. Maybe not in court. But I know the truth. Her letter, her diary, the evidence she left. You arranged her death and paid the police to cover it up." "She was already dead," Malcolm said coldly. "Spiritually, emotionally, I just expedited the inevitable." Cassian moved so fast Elena barely saw it. One moment he was beside her. The next he had Malcolm by the throat, pressing him against the wall. "Say that again," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Say that you killed her." Malcolm's face was turning red, but he managed to choke out, "What are you going to do? Kill me? Prove you're exactly what I always said the Blackwoods were?" Elena put a hand on Cassian's arm. "He's not worth it. He's not worth becoming a murderer." Cassian held Malcolm for another heartbeat, then released him. The old man slumped against the wall, gasping. "You're right," Cassian said to Eleanor. "He's not worth it. But he's also not getting away with what he's done. He pulled out his phone, made a call. "Detective Inspector Morris? This is Cassian Blackwood. I have information about a cold case. A death in 1997, Laura Hartley." "Yes, I'll hold." Malcolm's eyes widened. "You're calling the police? On what grounds?" "New evidence. A letter from the victim naming you as a threat. Financial records showing payments to a corrupt inspector. Testimony from witnesses who will confirm your abuse." Cassian's smile was sharp. "I might not be able to prove murder, but I can prove enough to make your life hell. I can tie you up in investigations and legal battles for years. I can destroy your reputation, cost you every friend and connection you have. And I'll do it all legally, using the same system you thought would protect you. You can't, I can. And I will, unless—" Cassian paused, looked at Malcolm with contempt. "Unless you disappear. Leave the country. Transfer your assets to Elena, your rightful heir, and go somewhere far away where we never have to see your face again. That's extortion. That's justice. Take the deal, Malcolm, because it's the only one you're getting." Elena watched her grandfather's face cycle through emotions: rage, fear, calculation, and finally defeat. He was old, his health was failing, and fighting Cassian Blackwood with unlimited resources and a vendetta would be a battle he couldn't win. "Fine," he spat finally. "I'll leave. But know this, both of you. You think you've won? You're cursed, just like Laura and Marcus were. The Hartleys and Blackwoods can't be together without destroying each other. It's in your blood." "Then we'll write a different story," Elena said firmly. "One where we choose each other despite the past, not because of it." Malcolm laughed bitterly. "We'll see how long that lasts." Cassian spoke into his phone, giving the inspector enough information to open an investigation while carefully avoiding anything that would require them to testify immediately. When he hung up, he looked at Malcolm. "You have 48 hours to leave the country. After that, I make this official, and you'll be arrested before you can pack a bag." They left him there, a broken old man nursing his hatred, and walked out into the rain. It was coming down harder now, soaking them within seconds, but neither of them cared. They stood on the pavement looking at each other, and suddenly Elena was laughing and crying at the same time, all the tension and fear and anger releasing in a rush. "We did it," she said. "So we actually did it." Cassian pulled her to him, kissed her in the rain, and it felt like coming home. Like the ending and the beginning all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Come home with me," he said. "Not just tonight. Forever. Move in with me. Let me love you. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I can be the man you deserve. I'm a Latin teacher who lives in a tiny flat in Elephant and Castle. You're a millionaire who lives in a converted warehouse in Shoreditch. We're from different worlds. Then we'll build a new world, one that's ours. Helena, I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm asking you to share your life with me, while keeping everything that makes you you. Keep teaching. Keep fighting for those kids. Keep being the idealist who sees the best in people. Just do it while letting me love you. What about your business? What about all those families you were going to displace? I'm changing the model. No more wholesale evictions. We'll work with existing communities, build affordable housing alongside luxury, create something sustainable. It'll mean less profit, but I have enough money for 10 lifetimes anyway. And I'd rather have less money and a clear conscience. That's a big change. You're worth a big change. You're worth everything." He kissed her again, softer this time. "Say yes. Say you'll give us a real chance." She thought about her mother, about Laura who had loved a Blackwood and been destroyed, but she also thought about how different their stories were. Laura had loved a man who didn't love her back, who used her and discarded her. Cassian loved Elena with an intensity that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. He was willing to change for her, to be better for her, to build a life that honored both of them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll move in with you. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Yes to all of it." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face into something young and hopeful. "Thank you," he said against her lips. "Thank you for trusting me, for giving me another chance, for loving me despite everything. Thank you for being worth it." They went back to his loft, left a trail of wet clothes to the bedroom, and made love with a desperate intensity, relearning each other's bodies, reclaiming what they'd thought they'd lost. Afterward, wrapped in each other, Eleanor felt a peace she'd never known. This was right. This was home. I love you, Cassian murmured against her hair. I'll love you until the day I die. I love you too, even when you're infuriating and arrogant and impossible. Especially then, she laughed, snuggled closer. What happens now? Now we live, we love. We build something that's ours, and we prove that curses are only as powerful as we let them be. That sounds perfect. It will be. I promise. And he kept that promise. Over the following months, Cassian transformed his business model, bringing in consultants who specialized in ethical development, working with community organizers, building housing that served all income levels. He endowed a scholarship fund at Cambridge for students from disadvantaged backgrounds who wanted to study classics. He used his wealth and connections for good, and slowly, his reputation began to change. Elena continued teaching, watching with relief as St. Benedict's not only survived, but thrived, benefiting from anonymous donations that allowed them to upgrade facilities and expand programs. She never said anything, but she knew where the money came from, and she loved him more for never seeking credit. Malcolm disappeared as promised, relocating to Monaco, where he lived in bitter isolation. The police investigation into Laura's death went nowhere, as they'd known it would. But the threat of it had been enough to drive him away, and that was its own kind of justice. Elena used the money from her mother's trust to establish a foundation for children in care, providing resources and support that she'd wished existed when she was young. It felt right, using something that had come from tragedy to create hope. A year after their reunion, Cassian proposed, not with a grand gesture, not at a fancy restaurant, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening when they were cooking dinner together, arguing about whether to put mushrooms in the pasta. He just set down his knife, turned to her, and said, "Marry me." She said yes before he could even pull out the ring. They married in a small ceremony at the Holy Cross Convent, with Sister Mary Catherine performing the service, and Elena's students as witnesses. It was simple and perfect, and nothing like the elaborate society wedding people expected. Cassian wore a suit but no tie, and Elena wore a vintage dress she'd found in a charity shop. They wrote their own vows, promising not perfection but effort, not flawlessness but growth, not ease but partnership. When they kissed, sealing their promises, Elena thought of her mother, of Laura who had loved and lost and been destroyed by it, and she chose to believe that somewhere, somehow, Laura was watching and was proud that her daughter had written a different ending. Standing at the convent altar with Cassian's hand in hers, surrounded by the people who mattered, Elena understood something fundamental. They weren't cursed. They were just people, carrying the weight of history but not bound by it, making choices that honored both who they'd been and who they wanted to become. Love wasn't easy. It wasn't simple or uncomplicated or always comfortable. It was challenging each other to be better, forgiving each other's failures, building something together that was stronger than what either of them could create alone. It was choosing each other, every day, despite the obstacles and because of them. It was standing in the rain and laughing while the world tried to tear you apart. It was surviving the ghosts of the past and refusing to let them dictate the future. It was this, Cassian and Elena, broken pieces that somehow fit together, creating something whole and new and entirely their own. Years later, when they had children of their own, when their empire had become a force for genuine good in the world, when they'd built a life full of love and purpose and meaning, Eleanor would think back to that first meeting at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the way he'd looked at her across the crowded gallery, the instant recognition that had passed between them, the feeling that her entire life had been leading to that moment. Malcolm had orchestrated their meeting, intending to destroy them. Instead, he'd given them each other, and that, Elena thought, was the best possible revenge against a man who'd spent his life breeding hatred and pain. They'd taken his manipulation and transformed it into love. They'd taken their family's tragic history and created a new future. They'd proven that curses only have power if you believe in them, and they'd chosen to believe in something better, in love, in change, in the possibility of redemption in each other. And that belief, tested and strengthened through everything they'd survived, became the foundation of a life more beautiful than either of them had dreamed possible. A life built on ruins, yes, but growing toward the light together.